So gentle push to mute, That's easy enough.
Testing, testing, testing.
screen is on.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get started. So thanks for coming. This is our last lecture for the spring. We've had a really busy spring, and for me, this is a kind of high point. Our guests are Salvador Macías and Magui Peredo, and we've been trying for years to have them come, and we already invited them before COVID, and then COVID hit, and they were refused to come virtually, which I really appreciated. They were like, we have to come in person, so we kept stringing this along. And before we start, I want you to know that they were supposed to fly into San Antonio. They ended up flying into Dallas and renting an Uber to get here on time, which can we just applaud that right away? Just like, yeah. I mean, the level of commitment, that's really unreal. So many of you know their work. Their firm, Estudio Macías Peredo, is arguably one of the premier design firms in Mexico, arguably in the Western Hemisphere. And it's interesting. I'll make this really short. It's interesting to watch how really good firms, their kind of career track. There's this kind of steep upward path where they have a kind of few small projects that become really widely well known. And then there's this kind of shoulder where they kind of broaden their interests in a series of kind of more substantial commissions. And then there's this upturn again, right, where all of a sudden those expanded commissions lead to kind of institutional work and kind of larger buildings and so forth, and bigger, prestigious commissions around the world. I think the interesting time to hear architects is when they're on this part, and then when they're right there at that little ankle where the firm is about to explode. Like, for example, years and years and years ago, Sejima spoke here. She'd only built one building. She was on the up part. But Macías and Peredo, they're on the part right here, where the firm is just about to explode, I think you'll see from the work. In this kind of period where they've been broadening their work, which I think we'll see some of those projects, I think right away you'll recognize these kinds of skills with which they negotiate the treachery of arguments like appearance versus occurrence, material versus phenomena, type versus morph, style versus style. Style is a verb, style versus noun. Very easily, and kind of resolving all of these things in a kind of calmest way. So I've been looking forward to this lecture for years. I'm so thrilled that they're here. With no further ado, Magui and Salvador.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much to UT School of Architecture for having us. For us, it's an honor because this university is very special. Our great teacher and mentor, Manuel Aguilar Moreno, not an architect, studied here at this university. He's a researcher of history, Mexican culture, and he has cultivated in us a large part of the interest that today we will show. I'm very happy to be here today. I will let Magui to lead the presentation. My English is not the best, but I will speak a little before ending.
Thank you. Yes, we have waited a long time to be here. We should have come before, but we are here now and very happy. So we cannot start without first thanking David Heyman enormously for not taking your finger off our names and bringing us here as soon as it was allowed. So thank you, David. Thank you, of course, to the School of Architecture for opening this space to share a little of what we do from Mexico, a country so close and so linked to the US, but also so distant in many ways. It is indeed a great honor for us. So Salvador and I are the founders of the studio. That is why it has our last names on it. But now we are three partners. Today we speak on behalf of the three of us, Diego Quirarte, who's not here, Salvador, and myself, and on behalf of the studio that makes Macías Peredo possible, that conforms this practice, a practice, in a specific part of the world. We believe that a practice is shaped and built from many biographical factors, such as the place in the world where it is established, where it is born, the meetings it has, the mentors, the references, the circumstances, etc., because they are also the filters through which you can relate to the world, and from there to be able to contribute something. In our case, it has also helped us to find affinity with the people who have collaborated with us, and also with those who come to us with the commissions we receive. We lead a studio that is based in the city of Guadalajara. Guadalajara is the second largest city in Mexico. And for us, something that has been very important is to be aware of who we are, why we look at things one way or another, and what is what we do. And Guadalajara has definitely influenced that. In contrast to some other Mexican cities, Guadalajara was a created city. It was a colony founded by the Spanish culture with no previous human settlements. So architecture there, from the very beginning, had always been a matter of importation, European importation. The great boom and growth of the city, as much in the world, came in the 20th century. It came along with the importation of foreign architecture models, mostly modern, Le Corbusier models, like you see here, but also there was a group of Mediterranean influences led by architect Luis Barragan, who was born in Guadalajara in his emergent architecture. But in any case, this architecture was made with the resources that were available and with very rudimentary local processes. Whatever the important language was, they were made the same during much of the 20th century. This type of architecture for us had been the most ordinary and familiar when we were very young. And how we did become aware of that? The professors who had an influence on us, and first architects with whom we worked, would take care of the construction of their projects themselves. Like these two very important teachers for us, Sergio and Hugo, whose houses were made through their direction as builders. We learned from our teachers that there was a culture in our city of being directly on site, taking care of the good execution of things. The architect is not only generating ideas, is the general contractor and responsible for the construction process. Much of the idea of architecture in Guadalajara relies on this careful execution. Therefore, starting an independent practice in this city inevitably forced us to build our initial projects. One of our first commissions was to turn this 1950s house into offices for rent. During the renovation work, we realized that beneath the surface, handmade brick walls were perfectly well executed. But it had been completely covered because of a pretension of being global, in this case modern. The value was not behind how well it was made, it was in belonging to an aspirational language. In this accidental revelation, we felt that the only thing we needed to do was to expose this traditional system. We found a great value and a great beauty on this. But the important was to realize that we lived in a city of artisans, where an important part of the population is dedicated to craft work of all kinds, and that construction was not exempt from this. It is today a place where the possibilities of handmade construction are still viable and at a reasonable cost. We became aware of that, and that we had a great opportunity behind this direct relationship with the craftsmen because they were our staff. That is, we not only had a few collaborators at the studio, we had employees on site, and we were in charge of leading them all. We allowed ourselves to react to the unknown, but also many times to experiment and to learn, to listen, and let ourselves be advised. From that moment, locality played a key role on our practice. We began to realize that having this relationship with an extraordinary workforce could become a way of doing and understanding a personal architecture. In addition to the idea of space, we felt eager to do projects that manifest this awareness of locality and the idea of good doing, executing well. To think that we could conceive an entire new house of an exposed brick from the beginning, a brick that was specially baked for a specific measure, to contain the structure, an artisanal luxury that can still be done in Guadalajara. In these first houses, we felt we need to leave some witnesses of this, leaving certain isolated bricks sticked out from the facades to show that they are not a coating, but part of an entire system. And the same with all the wood structure, carpentries, and all interior crafts. Being part of the performance of the building process has not only made us do things in a certain way, but also has made us think and relate to architecture in a certain way. As the office started growing and we were no longer just starting to make this type of pavilions, we needed to left behind the contractor role. But still, we do not imagine doing a project where we are not involved in the building process, because we have become ourselves in a way, or gotten used to maybe, in which we end up defining many situations directly on site in the process. As in this case of this house, where we wanted to be there to define what kind of plaster we wanted, experimenting with the master masons with pigments and additives to get the right stucco, or how to make precast concrete beams on site, testing concrete formworks so they could later connect to the rest of the structure, or how to make that ordinary clay brick become waterproof and fade its reddish color by preparing a liquid mixture in which each one of them could be baptized before assembling. Or every time this awareness of our context and its own ways of doing became stronger for us, directly related to the process of building architecture. In this sense, it is interesting to see how the first exercises of vertical housing in the city were like this. This is the example, made with the same rudimentary wall system than a common house. It may look like 5 houses were stacked up. And those who did this were the architects, the developers, and the general contractors at the same time. Something that seemed very ordinary now seems extraordinary to us when we have left the city and see that in other places it doesn't exist. These examples of the 60s and 70s, especially now, catch our attention. So when we were commissioned our first vertical housing building in the city, we thought if it was possible to make a building with all the contemporary conditions, but made with a wall system. Could it be possible to consider, despite the current conditions, time, economy, and construction system preferred by housing developers? In this exercise, we proposed a system of concrete walls that carry the entire structure of up to 8 levels. It is not made of columns or concrete frames. It is made of walls that support the entire building. With concrete walls, we managed to create free spaces inside, and we created controlled openings to reduce the impact of noise from large avenues and achieve greater intimacy. In this other housing building, the operation was the same, an architecture made of walls, cutting out openings. The wall is the one that dominates and tries to show how things have been done in Guadalajara, regardless the change in scale. And when these walls reach the ground floor, something interesting happens. They turn into arcs, so they can transfer the load into columns that come underneath at the basements. Arcs that also allows us to relate to one of the most traditional areas of the city, where we can find those first houses of the 30s and 40s of Luis Barragan and his closest colleagues, like this one, Casa Fara by Rafael Ursúa. When we were invited at RISE to reflect on housing in Guadalajara, we made this collage, this house repeated many times, to bring to the table the critical question of how to embrace the idea of domesticity also from the configuration of the interior space. Piling houses is an open exercise that we are still exploring, trying to give a more solid meaning to this idea because we are interested in our city. And now, we would like to move to another level of interpretation of our context, the wider context, Mexico as a country. It has not only been about understanding and interpreting our city, but it has also interested us very much to look at the Mexican context through other eyes, through people that saw our territory from the outside and from whom Mexico was a great influence. Between the three of us, there has always been a common interest about the primitive and the vernacular that keeps captivating us until now. An interest that we shared with these two German artists who became research topics for Salvador and myself on our master degrees in Barcelona. On the left side, we see Josef Albers, famous Bauhaus teacher, and on the right, Matthias Goeritz, who came to Mexico to introduce some of the principles of the Bauhaus in the schools of architecture in Mexico, both of them visiting here the ancient city of Teotihuacan. From them, we learned an extraordinary capacity of analysis and synthesis, of distilling and abstracting what they saw. For example, Albers took these photographs during his many trips to Mexico in the 1940s. He took hundreds of them, and later they served as abstract studies of form and geometry. We can see Albers with his students showing them a diagonal in those drawings, like the diagonal of the Mexican pyramids seen from above. And on the other hand, the sculpture of Goeritz, always influenced by this primitive and so rooted Mexican monumentality and landscape. Actually, Goeritz used to say that Mexico is the country where everything is possible. Something that has interested us about him is to understand how a foreigner becomes local by understanding the environment where he works. This image on the left is the only piece of architecture that Goeritz ever made, the Experimental Museum of El Eco in Mexico City. It was an architectural manifesto against the Mexican rationalism in architecture of the 50s that he named emotional architecture. That is why the walls of the museum are diagonals that never reach 90 degrees. We had the opportunity to develop a temporary intervention to the patio that enabled other ways to use the space. So we thought that we could establish a relationship with the building a new diagonal by lifting the whole floor of the patio, covering it exactly with the same clay floor of the courtyard, the same Goeritz was sitting on, working. And by that, we were able to build a new piece with the memory of its original condition. With this, we could erase the short wall that divides the museum and the street, building a bridge, a viewpoint towards the park that is in front of it. This was the question. Was it possible to read differently the same space, the same floor, same material, just by giving it another quality? And after this, an invitation to do another similar exercise came at the gallery called Liga in Mexico City, an intervention that somehow showed our interest when doing architecture, where again, we wanted to see what was there with a deeper, almost foreign look. And again, we turned to the floor, in this case, of black volcanic stone. We discovered that in order to obtain this commercial laminated floor, irregular stone from the mountain had to be manipulated. The pieces you see over that truck are the leftovers of that process. They were stone waste. We brought 33 tons of those leftovers to the small gallery, and with that, we rebuilt the space, filling it almost completely, leaving only a small concavity, celebrating the effort that makes this stacking work possible, and seeking for that rooted abstraction capacity of our foreign artists, Albers and Goeritz. As it also happened to us in San Luis Potosí, a very important industrial and mining zone in the country, where we found several industrial ruins and abandoned towns on the outskirts of the city, like the one we see here called Cerro de San Pedro. In this city, we won the commission of an office building that we made in collaboration with Manuel Cervantes Studio. We had to excavate 3 basement levels deep into the stone, the hard stone. There was so many stone that we are now running a house and a chapel in the surrounding area. What we were looking for was that from the ground downwards, the new concrete structure merged with this excavated stone, causing an intimate relationship between them, one maximizing the other. And as it rose upwards, the building evoked an aspect of vestige that remembered these old mining industries or haciendas of the surroundings with the emblematic pink soil and stone. We imagined that the project could be one more ruin like the ones we found, and in this way coexist with the arid, rocky, semi-desert landscape. And if this had always been there. Again, as foreigners, trying to build a dialogue with the place. In this case, the commission of factories in the landscape of Jalisco, a place surrounded by farms, barn roofs, mesquite trees that cohabit with the clay and rocky soil, a landscape that could easily be described in many Mexican tales and stories. We sought for the factories to adapt to the natural topography and that the color of the structures in some way imitated the land of the place, while outside the walls and reinforcements recall other pre-existing structures in the area. Inside, some patios allow the adequate light for industrial work. And finally, perhaps the richest, most exuberant, and inspiring place in which we have worked, the Yucatan Peninsula, where we have learned a lot about the exteriority of architecture, how to a great extent the pre-Hispanic platforms, the colonial atriums, and the haciendas are devices to see and receive natural landscape. Jorn Utzon already talks a little about it in Platforms and Plateaus, a reminder of his travels in this area. In this complex near Tulum, both the Access Building and the rest of the campus remind us of that, which has been very important for us. This means that the buildings are defined as large stepped planters that we hope one day will completely blend in with the site. And towards the interior, that they never stop having a relationship with that landscape, not only through a window, but also through the entire roof. Or like in this group of houses, also at Tulum, where you can go out from each level to have visual contact with nature, as happened in the platforms and buildings of the Mayan pre-Hispanic sites all over the peninsula. We are interested in recovering things from the place, abstract them, and use them to feel we can be part of a greater context, away from the singularity of the object of architecture. We believe in history as a mechanism that makes possible to create buildings loaded with knowledge. History is not something rigid. You have to have creativity to take advantage of it. If we want to make conscious, sustainable, and logical architecture, we need to learn from the understanding of the place through history. There we can find the keys to make an architecture that really belongs to the place and to read our present at the same time and make history useful. In that sense, we feel open to bring things to the table and make them relate each other if they are appropriate for a specific case without preconceptions. Here we are relating images taken from the books we have, which have similar techniques, all made by hand, but which come from completely different authors, times, and places. This collage is a new piece made from fragments of other documents. We imagine ourselves creating architecture projects like this. Here we put on the same level and same imaginary side the traditional Mayan hut that after 2,000 years remain being used on the Mayan region of Mexico, and the paradigmatic Farnsworth house, which curiously and compared to the other doesn't work as a house anymore. We like to think that these two architectures are not so distant. We wanted to communicate that beyond technique, there are no significant differences between them. We like to believe that through history and tradition is how our work establishes a continuity, which means it doesn't begin from scratch, not interrupts, but conciliates the site's history with its present. And now that we have mentioned the Mayan hut, when we were invited to make a small hotel in the island called Holbox at the Mayan zone of the country, we thought of the Mayan hut, where the structure of the roof made of cedar reinterprets the original roofs of the Mayan huts that allow flexibility in the resistance of hurricanes. So the walls mark the limit of the horizontal space, and the organic structure of the roof delimitates the vertical space. So what we have here is a collage of two architectures in tension, a light woven traditional handmade one at the interior and a solid white and abstract one at the outside, where you are surrounded by this massive landscape. We like to think that now the Mayan huts are fluted and their communication is through the water. We even proposed a viewpoint tower to overlook the island, and on one hand, it reminded us of this Palenque Palace, one of the structures that most interest us in the Mayan area. And on the other hand, a reminiscence to a contemporary small skyscraper placed on the edge of this triangular plot. These are the kind of contradictions and dualities that confront us and that attract us to address. Vone X, a talented French architect from the studio of Productora, defined our practice with this drawing and a writing he entitled "A Stick on a Beam," something taken directly from nature, barely transformed against a concrete beam that required certain technique to be possible. And we enjoyed it because it talks about an ability to bring things together, even though they might be totally opposite. In this house in the Pacific Ocean, we designed with Co-Arquitectura, there was a demand and a desire to use traditional thatch roofs from the locality. But we also found that a mat building could be an extraordinary strategy to guarantee a visual continuity of the landscape and the sea horizon without interruptions. We wondered if we could make both systems work together in a contemporary way. And so we did. A concrete structure would rise from the ground all the way up to meet the organic structure. We were amazed on how much a fixed concrete structure, when in contact with an organic one, can cause such a different reading of both, especially when there is such a clear structural correlation between one and another, as you can see here. Our architecture collage. But for a house confined among many other houses, we thought about a cloister. We wanted to look for that central void and horizontality at the same time, like the image of the brickyard on the left, or like the horizontality of Wright's prairie houses. Unlike the conventional cloisters of monasteries, where the patio is bordered by a semi-open corridor, here that space mostly becomes the interior of the house. And in other cases, terraces. The central void is a kind of large distributor with a roof without use, where the only purpose is to leave the experience of looking at it or going through it. And this is how we build ideas, starting from fragments of the past and the things that we see, that we apply and adapt. Sometimes it has to do with the constructive system, with the space, with the site, with certain language. In contrast to the rigor demanded by construction and good execution in architecture, we believe that when it comes to imagining, one has to know how to let go of that. Joseph Ketlas says that the game is not an unreflective or spontaneous activity, it is an operation that has to be done consciously. Games have rules, but we also believe that the good player, the one who really enjoys the game, once he knows the rules, never think about them again. This is a significant handmade clay plane we acquire in a craft market in Peru. We like it because it has the shape of an airplane. However, it doesn't fly. It only represents the idea of flying. We see the transnational sign of Air France, but also Peruvian flags and native Peruvians aboard. It's a toy, but it's fragile and heavy. Among all these contradictions, the serious idea of an airplane becomes an object of playing. Actually, we like to think that whoever made it was also playing and using certain amount of spontaneity and freedom. We like to think that we can make clay airplanes. And like this playing, we undertook the adventure of a Montessori school in Mazatlan, invited by our partner friend Eric Perez, where we only had 6 months to design and conclude the first stage of the master plan before the coming school year began. Maria Montessori proposed that the teacher shouldn't be a frontal authority, but a guide who moves around assisting children. The center is the scenario for everything to happen. The most basic concentric classroom was then transformed into a hexagon based on the 6 Montessori learning areas. We established a grid and played with as many hexagons as we could fit into the plot, testing the relationship they could have and what kind of voids were resulting from that. We thought the philosophy behind the building was the most relevant aspect. The project was just a stage for this to happen. We established an internal body as interior space and an external one which would create an in-between space and a covered circulation until we got our final master plan. The second layer of the building was key to the project because first, it allowed us to relate to children in a different way. We wanted to challenge the idea of crossing from one space to another through a special opening for them and for teachers. One that gives scale, but also that questions the conventions that children have about a door or a window. Why would they should be squares or rectangles? And secondly, because through control openings, we could pressurize wind to achieve an important cooling effect and deal with the high temperatures of the coast city of Mazatlan. The school is full of corners, passages, spaces of all kinds for children to decide what to do with them, to play all over them. We hope that by playing, they would find it playful too. Or in this existing house where we had to preserve the first part intact because it belongs to a group of houses of a historical moment of Guadalajara. The area of free intervention that was left behind was a deep void trapped by the walls of the neighboring houses. It seemed logic to set the rule of not having walls. The game was not about suffocating the space anymore, but to open it. How to gain as much oxygen and light as possible, that was the question. We thought, let's don't have any vertical structure, let's play with suspended beams. Beams that run all the way to the sides. Here you can see how the vegetation has grown on them. And in here, how the entire new program was suspended from these slabs or shelves. Here we see the connection between the existing spaces and the clear span new spaces. The stairs start right in that transition. Despite having so few square meters, light and ventilation flow freely through all these elements. Or in this very similar case, also conditioned by the perimeter of neighbors, where it was necessary to build 4 levels for 3 different houses. So each one of the slabs had to have different openings, a gradient of light coming vertically through the building. We were challenged by the idea of bringing natural ventilation to as many spaces as possible. Maybe it's easier to see the strategy we played at from the vertical communication of the building. And as one walks up and down the building, can find all kinds of open spaces in all different houses and levels. We managed that almost all spaces of the project had natural ventilation and light through open patios. Behind this rational building actually lies a strategy. What we designed was the structural scheme and the modulation so that each unit had total freedom to propose its interior layout. The facades then are simply the result of the interior proposal of each house on each level. The only thing we designed were the rules of the game. In this project, we feel that we are starting to get closer to that piling house model we talked to you about before.
And lastly, we believe that architecture should celebrate life and the events that take place in it. No matter what kind of activities, for us, it will always be an opportunity to build a scenario that promotes events, spaces that promote different activities, and imagine that people can grab and borrow these spaces and decide what to do with them. Of course, we are concerned about architecture in terms of structure, order, geometry, and space. But imagine situations in and around them is a question that is always stimulating to answer. Sometimes the most meaningful experiences happen in spaces like this, where the use is not that specific. As it happened in this house, where the pre-existing nature was the perfect setting to build experiences instead of a building roof. And life happens here. Meetings take place under the shade of this big tree. Or here, where the commission was only to design a security point to control vehicular and pedestrian access to a small group of houses, to surprise pedestrians with an overhead light and the opportunity to make a little public space that when these trees got bigger, pedestrians could have a moment of rest and shade. Or how, with such simple actions like in this eco pavilion, it's possible to promote a forum, or from the street, how the unexpected happened. Visitors of the museums overlook, and an ice cream vendor makes a sale. So rooftops with high walls can build shady spaces. One can feel there is a ceiling where there isn't, and enjoy outdoor activities under the sun. Spaces between the facade and the interior can be the stage for outdoor life. Or again, with the children here, how the way-covered hallways as an extension of the classroom, hiding from the intense sun of the tropical coast, or isolating themselves for a little while. And within the classroom, how all kinds of happenings are taking place, led by the form of the space. Always promoting the idea of center. In one of our visits, when the school was already running, we noticed there was some drawings in the classroom. The children were asked to draw their house in their school, but surprisingly for us, the difference was that when they drew their school, we are able to do it just like it is. This meant a lot to us because they were not trying to find archetype to represent a school like a kid would do for a house. They were drawing their own school.
More than any other project, we realize here that architecture still has the power to mean, to communicate. We want to make a pause on these kind of moments that give a deeper, different meaning to what we do, a special reward that encourages us to keep us on doing architecture. Thank you very much.
Yes?
Yeah?
So we have time for questions. Benjamin has agreed to be spontaneous translator. So questions can be as complicated as you want. But please, Benjamin, do you want to run this the questions or supervise who's asking questions? I can make.
Sure. Well, let it, if anyone has a question,
Maybe there's
we
no
can take questions,
O comentarios.
comments. Que se usan proporciones, hay unas series de proporciones y de reglas que usan para sus proyectos y que también están inspirados por varios.
Se ven muy similares entre todos los proyectos.
La historia es lo que explicaste.
Déjame te lo traducir.
¿Quieres que traduzca?
Sí.
For us, the history is the base to make architecture because architecture is a cultural object, and I believe, or we believe, that you can make a culture if you don't know the past. Voy a explicar esto un poco en español, a ver si me ayudas. Tenía un profesor llamado Joseph Ketlas
I had a teacher, his name was Joseph Ketlas,
que decía que proyectar era como proyectar es de proyectil.
that he said that the act of design in Spanish is proyectar, and it's like project something, to throw something. It's the same thing, proyectar.
Es desde tu eje hacia adelante.
From-
Pero que la mejor manera de lanzar hacia adelante es tomando vuelo hacia atrás.
So the way you project is from your axis, from your center, forward. But the best way of actually throwing or projecting is if you grab from behind, from the past to the front, forward.
And it's the same in a goal. The good
Player.
player is who can make more swing
From behind.
from behind. No, the idea principle of this game is not only touch the ball. The important is this movement. This is not touch, but it's more important when to touch. For us, these principles or principios are very important. It's for the reason that history are in all our projects. And is herramienta,
It's a tool.
Tool.
is a tool to make architecture. It's I don't know.
I think there's a lot of things we do unconsciously. I mean, I'm glad you you are a reflection of us. You are telling us something that maybe we have never noticed before, but of course there is. And I think it was Miss Van der Rohe who used to say that the reason he liked to teach, it was because in the classroom he was running this reflection on his head that when the time for commissions come, he wouldn't have that time to do that kind of reflections. The reflection was done previously to that moment. So I guess that, as you can see, I mean, we're always like traveling, having discussions inside this group of architects that we are, and when the time comes, it's like having the suitcases ready for a trip that has no destination and no date, but they're ready. And so I guess that we kind of sweat automatically whatever we have, and that is why you can see like probably the same subject repeatedly, because that's the conversation and the interest that we are having all the time. I don't know, but yeah.
And and maybe is one of the best tools to learn the context. No, and for us, the architecture is make context.
He didn't want to speak in English, and he's like, okay. But I'm so glad that here we go.
So many buildings, there's the difficulty of this being the GC, working the work so closely. You said you had to step away from
As a contractor role, yeah.
But then it strikes me, so all of a sudden then the imperative of things like clients or the marketplace take over your practice, right? It becomes more difficult because you're instead of supervising the work very closely, now you're one step away from it, and other things come into control.
Yes.
But it strikes me that the firm, has been really successful at keeping in the forefront a kind of idea of an architectural imperative rather than a marketplace imperative. And I wonder if that's a thing that in the office you're conscious of, or that you talk about, or how you work that out, especially with clients. Or are you still your own client?
No, we have never been. Never. We want to. When we left the contractor role, when we decided that, then what we say to the people who approach us for a commission, we say, okay, are you willing that you have us present during the entire building process? If you say yes, then we are in. But if you say no, I mean, if you just want to take our drawings and do this by yourself, then it's not the kind of practice that we do. This is the studio we have. Are you interested? Yes, and then, okay, then we have a conversation and we can talk. And, but I think especially Salvador, he's all the time in the building process. I mean, the thing that was very heavy when we had that role is that it was extremely demanding. You know, you have, it was a lot of time. And, but now we are always, we assure ourselves to be there every time in the process of the project, which makes our work even more difficult because we have to be traveling the whole time because we are now taking projects outside from Guadalajara. We have projects all over the country, so we travel a lot to go and look and see and supervise, and we are very into that process. We didn't know anything about construction when we left the university. It was a whole master degree. For us, we didn't know anything, but we felt the only thing we needed to do was to step in there and listen because the experts are there. But we didn't know how they would do it, how they would decide things. And over the years, with that school over our shoulders, we couldn't just say, okay, let's rest all what we have learned on somebody else. No, we want to be there. What we don't want is the role. But we want to be there. I don't know if ¿Tú quieres comenzar?
Y algo que es también muy importante para nosotros
And something that is very important for us
es entender desde un principio quiénes son los que van a construir el edificio.
to know who is going to be in charge of building or constructing the building. Yeah.
Y quién es su equipo constructor y qué puede hacer.
And how's the team conformed and what they can do.
Muchas veces la estrategia del proyecto inicia ahí.
Many times the project strategy starts right there.
Y Diego, nuestro otro socio, ahora ha sido un apoyo para poder tener más proyectos en la obra, con más obras y visitar las obras.
And Diego, who is now a partner in the firm, has brought more capacity to the firm to address and to supervise projects all over the place.
I think it evolves a lot because since we are so close to the building process, we have the possibility to build one-to-one models of anything. I mean, we know now that this is a luxury. Maybe I'm telling this to you and this is, I don't know, how does these kind of things work here? But there it's so easy, you know? Who's a master mason? Who's a carpenter of this specific project? Okay, Pascual. Okay, hi Pascual, how are you? How would you do it? I would do it like this, like this, like this. Okay, let's mock up 1, 2, 3 options, and then our client would come with us. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. We say 3. What do you say? Okay, 3. Okay, now. But we understand this is not even economically, to do a budget of which one of the models. Okay, this one. Okay, let's run to the budget so the client can approve it, and then we know. But we explain this to our clients, and they say, okay, yes, I want that. Because it's a unique practice. If you don't need this, don't waste your time, your money. We understand you, but we feel like, how do you say when you go to the psychiatrist hospital? Like you feel like this, okay, no, this is for us, no. If you say no, you can do that, okay, so don't hire us, please, because we're gonna suffer a lot. Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a style or a type or architecture of or brand architecture for us. We prefer study the context, and the context tells us, nos dice qué queremos.
What we want.
¿Qué quiere el proyecto? El contexto es quien dice, que nos dice qué es la arquitectura adecuada para el lugar, y no tratamos de imponer nosotros eso.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the place tells us what to do. That is why we like vernacular and the primitivism of a place, because it kind of tells us the keys of what is natural to do in a specific place. It's a guide. So, I mean, we cannot do the same everywhere. The place tells us what to do. And in Mexico, we have the opportunity that we have this workforce that we have there. It's amazing. And it's not the same in all over Mexico, but you can find it everywhere. So, okay, what do you do here? Okay, we do this kind of things. Okay, let's work with that and take it to another level. That's what we. But that was a good question.
Well, thanks very much for the lecture. Gracias por la presentación. The question is about I mean, you have a the craft and labor are very important in what you achieve with architecture. And it seems that it's happening in your architecture and it's happening in many places in Mexico, recognizing that craft and the value of the labor and how customizable that could be, right? Now, we have seen this moment in time in Mexico before. I'm thinking about Felix Candela's shapes that were actually possible because the labor was there, right? But once the labor started to get a little bit more expensive, getting unionized, it was harder for Candela to do that any longer, right? So I'm wondering if you have any type of vision or are looking at in any moment to think about elements in your buildings that have been either prefabricated or standardized, that are not custom made, and if there is any way in which you see yourselves actually implementing that in your architecture.
Yo creo que es inevitable, si tú me ayudas, es inevitable sí, que el mundo de la prefabricación invada todo México y América Latina y cualquier otro país, ¿no?
It is inevitable that prefabrication and standardization is going to go with us because it's all over the world.
Pero hoy en día todavía es posible, y para nosotros el que hoy todavía sea posible es una oportunidad de alargarlo más posible también en nuestra práctica.
But the thing is that in our context, it is possible to put away this subject of prefabrication and standardization because we have the possibility to do also the other things. So we prefer to focus on those other things. Exactly. There is an architect whose name is Juan Herreros. I don't know if you have ever heard of it. It's very Spanish. It's a Spanish, very successful architect. And he says that the most difficult project that an architect has to do in his life is to design its own practice. That there are as many practices as architects in the world possible. So what we tried to present today was that we are not fighting against anything that has approached to us. We are embracing it all and trying to define what is our practice, the kind of practice that suits us and that we can offer even as a unique practice. That is what this presentation has taken a long time to understand and for us to be aware of many things that you listened today, but we can say this to you now because we have a certainty that this is who we are and this is what we can offer to the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much.